Aid workers and news media have traditionally depended on one another. Aid workers know where the suffering is, where the stories are, and they often rely on the media to get those stories out to the world, to sound the alarm. None of which is usually controversial, unless the alarms being sounded are from Gaza.
We always realized that opinions were very polarized over the situation in the Middle East, so we went into this with our eyes open.
But in the end, our argument is that this is about a humanitarian disaster, nothing more, nothing less. It's about real people in real time suffering real problems.
This story began with the end of the fighting in Gaza. Journalists, most of whom had been locked out of the war zone by the Israelis, went into Gaza in huge numbers. So did aid workers.
The children of Gaza are suffering.
The Disasters Emergency Committee, an umbrella group of 11 British charities, saw a humanitarian need and launched an appeal for donations built mostly around the most powerful medium available, television.
About the rights and wrongs of the conflict.
It's very simple. We go to our friends in the broadcasters, to the post office, and we say we want to launch an appeal. And this time some of the broadcasters and radio stations have backed us and some have chosen not to.
Two channels opted out of the televised appeal, the taxpayer-funded BBC and Sky News, a private channel owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation.
Sky News has told the Disasters Emergency Committee that it doesn't intend to broadcast its appeal for Gaza.
This is how the BBC's Director General justified the decision.
We do want to cover the humanitarian story. We want to cover it in our news programmes where we can put it in context, we can do it in an even carefully balanced, objective way, and we worry about being seen to endorse, something which could give people the impression that we were backing one side.
The BBC's decision sparked a huge response. Demonstrators descended on BBC offices, accusing the corporation of a pro-Israel bias. Religious leaders, Christians among them, were also critical.
Anti-babe, wake up and get on with it.
As were some politicians.
And I just want to finish just by making one remark about the BBC. It has been run by idiots for the last decade.
One of the BBC's flagship programs, Newsnight, reported 15,000 complaints, as opposed to some 200 letters of support. And, to their credit, BBC journalists put some tough questions to their own executives on the air.
This looks as if you're just scared of the Israelis.
We're not scared of the Israelis. The BBC has broadcasting from Gaza, covering this war with neither fear nor favour for either side.
Well, I think the decision by the BBC and Sky is disgraceful. If you look at the BBC's reasons for not broadcasting the appeal, I mean, they're all redundant. They're saying that they didn't want to seem partial to the conflict. Well, I mean, they've actually shown their bias by not broadcasting the appeal. I think this was really just kowtowing to the pro-Israel lobby.
The BBC has refused to air aid appeals before, on 2 occasions. Once it said no to an appeal for East Africa, saying it could not be sure that the aid would reach the people it was intended for. The only precedent for the BBC refusing an appeal on the grounds of editorial impartiality occurred in 2006, after the war in Lebanon.
The only one that I can recall that's similar to them saying no to was the Lebanon appeal, which you never saw because it never happened. And again, that featured Israel. The common factor seems to be the Israeli issue.
So it seems to be that the BBC only has a problem with impartiality when it comes to the Middle East. It doesn't seem to have the same problem with Africa or with Asian conflicts in the same way as it has done with both Gaza and Lebanon.
Like many news outlets, the BBC is very sensitive on the Palestine-Israel story. Israeli politicians have frequently accused BBC journalists of a pro-Palestinian bias. In 2004, BBC conducted an internal study of its Mideast coverage, but never made the findings public. Last year, the BBC launched an Arabic-language TV news channel. And in the midst of the Gaza appeal controversy, Director General Mark Thompson met with the staff of BBC Arabic, where he was grilled by journalists concerned that this controversy would damage BBC Arabic's reputation for impartiality.
I've spoken to people in BBC Arabic who are extremely angry at the BBC's decision. BBC Arabic television is very new. And this will come at a time where it needs audiences and audience trust in that region to make that venture a success. And it is very hard to see how people will continue to be tuned in to the BBC after a saga like this, when they have other stations to watch within the region that they feel would speak up more in their interest.
The decision taken by BBC and Sky News could have implications not just for the people of Gaza. This controversy could end up denying victims of other conflicts, future conflicts, the help they need.
This does mean that whatever happens with any future appeal, whether it's for the Middle East or for another conflict situation, those decisions are going to be scrutinised ever more carefully. And questions are once more going to be asked is, if one comes up for, say, the Democratic Republic of Congo in a couple of years' time, or another conflict situation, why would the BBC be willing to go ahead with that when it wasn't prepared to go ahead with one for Gaza?